Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Yes, we do.
This week, Carl Teichrib from Forcing Change and Bill Honsberger from Haven Ministries joins us for the 2023 Parliament of World Religions Debrief. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And here is Ron Hensel to introduce the sponsors of today's webcast.
Yes, our senior researcher. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Designer Jesus Collection. No longer need your Jesus be a source of social embarrassment. Check out the new Jesus fashions at a church runway near you. Our regular legal disclaimer. Our guests on today's webcast insert names here. Carl Teichrib and Bill Honsberger have no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall into the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular notices. The opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. To ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now I'm looking for Carl. He's not yet here, but you know what? We don't care. We are going to give our regular guest, Bill Honsberger, a round of applause. Welcome to the Unknown Webcast Show. We care enough about you to provide only the best in fake applause.
Well, guys, I like your new intro. Very cool.
Yeah.
I won't dispute the part where it said a touch of satire.
Did we say a touch?
It said a touch of satire.
Yeah. We're trying to be very touching here.
That's great hyperbole right there. I like it.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You said it.
But we didn't want to publicly acknowledge and admit that we just mostly like making fun of you. And of course of Carl when he is here as well.
Oh, look who shows up. Our Bible study just covered Isaiah 29 last night, and there's so much satire. So I had to give an alert to my wife, who is truly satire challenged. She's way too nice, and I feel bad for her that way. I'm not burdened by that kind of, handicap, but she is very nice. And so I was warning her, God is talking about a wondrous deed he's doing in Israel as he's about to slam them.
Yes.
Incredible grotesque sin.
I really like the one where he's talking to the guy. He says, okay, I don't really get this. You cut down the tree, you cut it into three. On one part, you cook your food, and one part you warm yourself, and one part you carve out an idol and fall down and worship it and say, deliver me.
Isaiah 42 to 48.
Exactly. What's that?
Now, while I was doing my little intro thing, I got these earbuds on, and I get these notices that have audible notifications. Did you hear it when it happened?
No.
Good. Okay. Now, if he didn't have earbuds on, you would have heard it because it would have come out in the speaker.
We're just
It
old.
was just in your head.
Most things are.
So, Carl, welcome. Glad you were found that as you were wandering the hallways of the internet, you happened on our door. We're glad you were able to make it.
Well,
the Designer Jesus Collection is our sponsor this week, and Carl, you're familiar with that. And part of the reason we did that is we have something we have been developing, I've used in articles, called the Good Jesus Keeping Seal of Approval. Because virtually every religion includes Jesus in some way. It's a newly designed Jesus, just for them.
Jesus.
But there's this sense that they feel like to have really true credibility, they have to include him into their schema. Now, at the Parliament of World Religions, didn't you find that to be true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was one of the exhibition booths that was giving out a version of digital Jesus. You could you could go on in line and discover a new kind of Jesus right there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I ended up talking to some various representatives. I remember having a conversation with one member of Islam, and absolutely right away, we have a Jesus. Of course, we have a Jesus. Everybody has a Jesus. The Mormons have a Jesus. The JWs have a Jesus. The New Agers have a Jesus. Even the atheists have a Jesus. You know, it's a punching
And
bag. But
Jesus has become Gumby.
yeah,
You know, you can
yes,
stretch it any way you want. That's what makes it so fun. A stretchable Jesus who's never going to say a single thing you don't like. That's the great thing about this flexible Jesus, is that
yeah.
he's no challenge to anything that you are or think or believe or act.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there were two things, and I'm going to bring a couple of pictures up just so the audience kind of gets an idea or a flavor for what it is that we walk into. But there were two big takeaways for me, and Jeff Wisner, one of our cohorts in crime here, the crime of invading the safe spaces of the world religions. Uh, so the two things were every one of them includes a Jesus of some type. The second one is truth only comes by inner knowingness. There's no objective truth by which you can measure things. It is that you just internally know what's true and right. Now, again, what did you guys experience in all of that?
Well, I'll give you my most egregious example. There were a lot of things there. Some of you were at this meeting with Richard Rohr, probably the most infamous or famous religious leader in the country for the last several years. Father of the popularity of the Enneagram that you deal with, Don, and so many other things. Well, Rohr was in a conference with Elaine Pagels from the Gnostic Gospels fame from Princeton University and three other clowns, singing the praises of, you know, magic mushrooms and LSD and all these other hallucinogenics, on how this enhances and opens the divine doorway for you and all this kind of stuff with the divine source. And it was all I could do. I don't know about you guys that were there, but it was all I could do not to throw something. I was so ticked off. My first cousin blew his head off on LSD. My best friend's little brother blew his head off on LSD. And that's just people I know really close. But, you know, there are so many people that grew up in the 60s and 70s that know darn well what these things do to people and the price tag that so many people paid for. And I can look at this and say, well, I don't think my cousin was enhancing his relationship with the divine by blowing his head off. And that these guys are singing the praises of Timothy Leary and stuff like this. It's just, you know, again, I try to stay in missionary mode and not get up and start screaming bloody murder. But the fact that that was such a popular thing, they had to pack the room out of sardines. You know, people thought it was wonderful, and that this is entering into religious circles. I mean, this is a curse on our nation.
Bill, I'm going to ask you a technical question here. Do you have a set of earbuds or headphone? We're getting echoing.
Yeah, we're getting echoes.
Yeah, but they're not connected.
Okay. While you do that, I want to.
The computer.
While you do that, I'm gonna go to Carl.
I would echo what Bill was saying regarding that specific workshop. That specific workshop. I mean, Don, I believe you were there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a full house. There was a lot of energy and excitement over what was going to be discussed. So I found it interesting how, in a way, it was an argumentation being made for injecting the psychedelic sense of spirituality into the institutional side of Christianity. The argument being made that we need to have psychedelic spirituality brought into seminaries and into chaplaincy services.
Right.
You know, so there was an institutional side. So I'm gonna step this one giant step beyond what happened at the Parliament. And then, Don, you knew this. After the Parliament was done, I ended up going to Burning Man. One of the workshops I attended at Burning Man, and it fits hand in glove with what we heard from Richard Rohr, was a workshop entitled Jesus and Psychedelics. And so we had it was a camp with a series of workshops and that you could partake in. And this one had about 50 people or so in attendance, and we had past and present members of or ministerial within the Lutherans, Presbyterians, the Episcopal Church, and a lot of people just generally interested in psychedelics, all now giving personal justification. So the Parliament, we heard an institutional justification to bring psychedelics into play, and now I'm at Burning Man, and now I'm hearing it from, I'm going to use the quotation marks, the Christian community now for a personal justification, because now psychedelics allows us to feel agape love. Psychedelics allows us to feel the love that Christ felt. Psychedelics now allows us to view scripture from a more holistic perspective. Those are the arguments being made. I've got a whole list I wrote down from that workshop. The arguments or the justifications to personally take psychedelics and bring it into the Christian community. So for me, it's really interesting bookends from the institutional side of the Parliament to personal at Burning Man.
Does holistic now mean hallucinatory perspective? Is that what that word now?
Yeah, it was interesting. There was one old burned out hippie guy that's up in San Francisco who said he went through the whole, Haight-Ashbury moments and all this. And he was talking about how it's really important, and Rorty said it too, and a couple others chimed in. It's really important you have a really good person with you while you're doing this experience with God.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, isn't that interesting? Even the gurus of old in India, would talk about not only the mindless meditation, how you can get screwed up using that, but also using soma and other drugs. This kind of stuff, Paul addresses in Galatians 5, the pharmakia phrase that's maybe mistranslated slightly as sorcery, because this is so common in pagan thought and pagan religion. It is literally everywhere. That you meet these spirits or these beings, these somethings, while you're doing these drugs. And I was trying to make the case, especially with ancient paganism, you look into the totems that you find everywhere from Siberia all across the Aleutians to, all of North America and everything. They have these horrific looking characters on them. And it's my argument that these are things that people actually saw while they're doing all these different drugs. They saw these things and they carved this out. That was their artwork to worship the thing that they had actually seen.
Well, Bill, just one little historical point. They say if you remember being at Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, you weren't really there.
To your point, Bill, during the Burning Man conference, or pardon me, the Burning Man workshop on psychedelics and Jesus, Brian, who came with us to the 2018 Parliament, Brian and Audrey were with me, and Brian asked the question, how many in the room have had an experience with entities? And almost half of the room put their hands up.
Including the government?
Well, yeah. But it was really interesting, because then people were making all of a sudden somebody was saying, yeah, machine elves, going back to Terence McKinnon, or certain manifestations, and it opened up this conversation to recognize that, okay, psychedelics is this, there's this opening that seems to take place, this allowance to bring in that spiritual experience, and yes, there's entities, there's something that does indeed start to manifest.
Carl, I would add to that the rest of the room that didn't have an actual experience yet would give their right arm to have that experience. They're chasing this stuff everywhere.
Well, it was interesting in the Roar workshop that we're talking about. It was, like you say, Elaine Pagels and Richard Rohr and several others. And Rohr was advocating for something that struck me as odd and interesting, but in keeping with who he is. And that is that the psychedelics are, how did he phrase it? Sacraments of the church. And I wondered, how would that work? Would you like to, I don't know, communion on one week and do psilocybin the following week? And how does that work itself out in the church service exactly?
Well, don't be so close-minded. Don't put all together. You can even, the communion wafers with psychedelics. That'll work too.
Yeah.
Well, and Timothy Leary, of course, described LSD as a sacrament.
Yeah.
Right.
You remember right before he died, and LSD, which had been basically, when I was high school, the bad things were LSD and heroin. Grass was okay, hash was okay, but LSD and heroin were the biggie, the baddies that'll mess you up. So it kind of went out of favor after Jimmy and Janis and all the famous rock stars started dying off of this thing. About 15 years later, in the mid 80s, now I'm a youth pastor, and LSD is making a comeback amongst young people. And I can't remember which magazine, but somebody interviewed Larry, shortly before he died. And they asked him about this resurgence of interest in LSD. And he says, well, I'm a little worried. The kids think it's for partying. They don't realize it is a spiritual experience, just to back up what Carl just said. That's Larry's point of view. And he's the guru for all these guys. And they sang his praises, at the session in the parliament. And there was another one. You remember the lady that was there, a Baptist minister,
right,
female Baptist minister, who teaches at Perkins Seminary, which is connected to SMU. And the old joke, and I became a brand new Christian in my senior year in Dallas. The old joke was, Brother Andrew's smuggling Bibles into Romania. Some of the locals want to smuggle Bibles into Perkins, just to change faces with people. So Perkins is one of the two most important Methodist seminaries training Methodist ministers. The other one is here in Islet. I had to actually take 2 classes in my doctoral program at DU. And it was, the chance of running into a Christian at Islet was next to non-existent, completely non-existent. But you still have this same mentality that this is what's infesting the church. It's people who literally hate the Bible, hate the Christianity, but they got collars. They want to look like there's some sort of, ministerial thing. And for some, unknown reason, they're still hanging on to Christianity as a title, even though they would say right off the bat, the Christian church is evil and awful. Well, why are you calling yourself that?
Well, something that both of you have already brought up that I wanted to key in on as well, because I was listening to this through the entire workshop they were doing, Richard Rohr and Pagels and others. And that is this sort of almost flippant attitude of take the church sacrament of psychedelics, and everything is warm and fuzzy, and you'll really become in tune with God and everything. And I reflected on that as we had been at the 2023 Paganicon conference, and Bill and I were in the workshop by the shaman who was advocating these spiritual trips, but she was very clear that as soon as you enter, you have to have a good spirit to protect you. And I posed the question, how would you know if it's a good spirit? And she said, well, you asked, and I'll be honest. Oh, okay. But the reason is to protect you from evil. What is that? We got something going on here. Okay. Ron, your mic is off.
Yeah. Just going back to your Pagani.
I think Carl's microphone was on way loud.
Okay.
I want to emphasize something that we all saw. What was great, there's probably about 11 or 12 evangelicals there sharing their faith everywhere, all over the exhibit. I think every single one of us, as we talked about at dinner last night, was having 3 to 4 great, at least an hour-long conversations, some of them repeat conversations with Muslims and witches, Mormons, New Agers. I had a New Age publisher just sent me an email this last week. He wants me to publish his books, help sell his books. And I'm talking to this dude. He writes children's books that are all New Age. And I told him, yeah, I bought that book 20 years ago in a New Age bookstore. He goes, really? Why? I said, well, because it shows what you guys are doing, for young kids and homeschoolers, for, pagan homeschoolers. And so I said, well, what do you think about this page at the end? And it's like, everything is God and everyone is God. And I said, do you really think that? And he goes, oh, of course. Secular Jewish fellow, just like most of the people I grew up with in LA. And I said, so was that guy killing God at Auschwitz? And he switched away to somebody else that was looking for a book, to buy a book. There are price tags for these beliefs. And part of what we do is try to make them face up to the price tag for these beliefs. But I was very encouraged by the fact that as a missionary and as part of several missionaries there at the Parliament, people were sharing the faith all over the place. And that was awesome. Absolutely awesome. You just walk down the hall and there's a Christian over here talking to these people and a Christian over there talking to these people. I was just so blessed by that.
Yeah. So let's do a couple of pictures here so people can get kind of excuse me, an understanding of some of the things that we are seeing when we go to the Parliament. So this is in the opening session here of the Parliament, and I don't know how well you can see this, but you have people from literally every religion. I think there were 275 religions represented this year, and somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 participants. So it's pretty interesting. Then you have this is Hare Krishna booth, so we can go and sing along with who was it that did Hare Krishna? Harrison.
Yeah, George Harrison.
Yeah. So we can sing along with George Harrison and chant and all of that, and that's a good thing for them. And then we have something I thought was interesting: the 10
Climate
principles of climate.
repentance.
What?
Climate repentance. Wow.
Repentance. Yes. We are stewards of this world. 1, 2, creation manifest divinity. 3, everything in life is interconnected. 4, do no harm. That sounds like Wicca, doesn't it? 5, look after tomorrow. 6, rise above ego for our world. 7, change our inner climate. Okay. 8, repent and return. 9, every action matters. 10, use your mind, open your heart. Now, last time we were at the Parliament, they had a booth you could go to write letters of apologies to mom. What's wrong with this? What does this tell us about their view of the planet?
It's God.
It's Romans. This is a Romans 1 situation.
Literally is, yes. And you know, if you listen to Matthew Fox or, you know, now Richard Rohr or a host of others, the planet itself, the universe, is in fact divine. So it's either pantheism or panentheism, subtle distinction, not worth it mentioning. But this whole thing sees the world as divine. And that's always been the pagan mindset, which is why you can worship the frog and you can worship the deer and you can worship, you know, the tree and so on and so on. So the introduction of the God of the Bible is an affront to the oneness of all things and the divinity of all things, and therefore it's hated, and it always has been.
Yeah. One of the workshops I attended was a workshop with Karina Gore, Al Gore's daughter, and the investment manager for the Presbyterian Church, the investment manager for one of the largest Islamic organizations, and I believe a a Jesuit school, and the Franciscan order, and it was all on divesting for climate change, and divesting jointly, doing it as a network, and undercutting the global petroleum industry's access to global marketplace and to global funding. And in their words, to shut it down. That was what they were describing. I walked out of that workshop and ended up bumping into right at the very beginning of the exhibition, right, you know, kind of that transition point between the registration area and the exhibition hall was that climate change stand where you could put, either you were extremely worried and super concerned and you were, you know, your head's going to blow because you are so worried about climate change, and then maybe you're somewhat worried about climate change. I had that billboard. You could put a sticker on where you stood, or not so worried, or not worried at all. And of course, the side of that billboard, which was all on I'm really worried about climate change, was just loaded with stickers showing, yeah, of course, I'm very, very worried. But there's only a handful on the far right side, ironically, and I think it was us. And so I had this gentleman come up to me. He says, "Can you put a sticker? Can you put a sticker on where you stand?" And I gladly. So I stuck it on. I'm not worried at all. And he was in shock, literally just aghast. Don't you know what's going on? And I mean, I've played this game a lot. I've been to oodles of global governance events and other forums like this. And so I explained that to him, and how this is basically this is politics. That's what this is. Actually, spirituality or a religion with a form of politics.
Right.
And he was listening, and then I kind of played him like a yo-yo, and maybe it wasn't very good of me, maybe not very Christian, but I said to him, and this is true, I said, I'm building an off-grid house. And I've got solar panels. My whole place is run with solar panels. And he was going, oh, very good, very good. See, you are doing something for the climate. And I'm like, no, 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 very bad, very bad. Because all of my solar panels are fused through the power of coal and natural gas. And now you want to divest and destroy the petroleum industry, and your words to shut it down. And if you do that, you no longer have the ability to fuse the panels in your solar collectors at all. Zero. No coal, no natural gas, no solar
And
panels.
solar panels.
And he was like, he didn't know what to do. It just,
Right.
it was a lot of fun.
I would say the Parliament reflects. We'll be at a psychic fair this Saturday, so everybody pray. But I've been doing this for 32 years, going to psychic fairs. So you're always running into all this kind of new agey and bizarre groups and stuff like that. Almost every single one of the people that I talked to used to be some sort of Christian. Second thing about it, they're all hard left politically, which is why the climate person would have been so shocked that you weren't buying into this, because that's become the religion of the left, because it's worshiping Mother Earth again. And again, that's old, Gaio, whatever you want to call it, goes way back. I have met one person, and he's a Urantia reader. Most of you know what that is. And he's a conservative. And I said, are you afraid of being outed? He's a lawyer that I've had lunch with for several times for a few years now. And it's like, I could use this manipulation. Become a Christian or I'll out you to your friends. But it's amazingly consistent. They're all hard left. And they're,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they're necessarily beyond the pale. Certainly not. The Holy Spirit grabs everyone and anyone that he chooses to.
absolutely.
But we have to understand that I don't talk politics with them, Carl. And I'm not saying what you do is wrong. I don't, because I just know where that's going to go. So
Yeah, and I knew where it was going to go too, Bill. I knew already where it was going to go, but I couldn't help myself. It was he'd asked me to play a political game. All right, cool. I'll play that political game.
I want credit for not throwing anything at Richard Rohr. I think I deserve some sort of credit. And the second one, there's a booth there like there was in Australia for Adi Da, who personally screwed up two close friends that I grew up with. And when I was in Australia, that was the first time I'd seen those people ever at any events. And I went off on them. I was so upset. It was my worst missionary moment of my entire life as a missionary. And I had to go back the next day and apologize, because I was so upset with those people. And there they are at the Parliament this time again. And I pass by and go, okay, bite your tongue, bite your tongue, bite your tongue. Don't say what you want to say.
All right. So a core claim of the Parliament is that they're trying to gather everyone together to be inclusive and to bring about world peace. Now, in about a minute, how has the Parliament, because you and I, Bill, were at the one in 1993. We weren't at the one in 1893. That was a little, just barely before.
Did you check your calendar to make sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Give me,
1993.
it's so,
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been to 4. I think Bill's been to 5, maybe, or 6. 5, yeah, 5. Carl started going more recently, around 2016, I think.
Yeah, he's a young. He's just.
How has it changed, Bill, from when we first went to where we're at today, as far as their attitude about inclusiveness?
You remember Robert Mueller was the keynote speaker for the 93 one. He was Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for like 50 years. Knew Thatcher, Gorbachev, Khrushchev, Reagan. He knew everybody. And he gave the opening message to about 8,000 or 9,000 people. And it's all, we're all one. We're all God. And then the third point was so interesting. We have to do something about those fundamentalists out there. I know I could feel the love, from what he was saying. And he screamed at me several years later. He came here to Denver and spoke in his.
I don't blame him. I would do the same thing.
Get in line. There's a lot of people want to scream at me, but
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting. It's like Mueller was very open about the fact that we need to create a one world religion. We need this in order to support the one world government. He's published that for years. I'm not a conspiracy, no tinfoil in my house. But that's what he was saying. That's what the purpose of the Parliament is. And I don't think that's changed. The interesting thing is the Parliament leaders, the elite of the Parliament, they'll all talk that way, how we need this one world religion, this one world movement. But then you talk to the people at the booths and the exhibit halls, individual Muslims or individual Orthodox Jews or people like this, and they don't buy into that one bit. So it's kind of a split thing. And so you remember at the first one in 1993, the second one actually, but Hans Kung gave this, towards a global ethic that they actually made a big deal out of that at this one. Several of the speakers were relating to the global ethic that Kung, kind of a radical Catholic, had made many years before. And most people can't buy into it. They just can't. And when
They've continually revised the global ethic, trying to get more people to buy into it, because the original one, most rejected it. They're like, no, we're not giving up our religions for you.
Yeah, like don't lie, don't commit immorality, don't murder, and don't steal. That was the four things it was reduced down to. And Erwin Lutzer, I actually saw this happen in the hallway. Erwin Lutzer went up to Dr. Kung after his presentation on this and challenged it. He basically just restated four of the commandments.
Right.
And Kung's like, yeah, that's what they are. And I looked at him and said this thing. He says,
I mentioned right at the top that all of them include Jesus. Yeah. And one of our sponsors is interested in that.
Yes, they are. And this is Don's way of saying it's time for me to get that screen up. Yeah. So one of our sponsors is very interested in that. They're very, very cosmopolitan in their approach to things. So, and they asked the question, do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You won't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements, cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire, social, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and coming to a church runway near you. So be there or be something.
Or be something.
Or be some other odd
was defending freedom and humanity. I'd have to go back and look at the exact, but and humanity. And so, human rights, defending freedom and human rights.
Defending freedom from humanity.
So Bill and I proposed a workshop that basically was this. If we're going to defend freedom and human rights, it seems we should have a description of what a human is that we can all agree on.
Uh-oh. Now we got trouble.
And, is it something that kings and potentates decide, or is arrived at by judicial fiat, or is it lawmakers that orchestrate it, or do each individual human decide what other humans, whether they're human or not? Is it based on location, those sorts of things?
Can I identify as non-human?
Yeah. So, and they accepted it. Now, really, we want to do that to make a defense for a pro-life position based on defending human rights. And we quoted, Bill added Pete Singer. Now, for those who don't know that, who's Pete Singer and who's the other?
Michael Tooley.
Michael Tooley. Who are they and why are they important?
Dr. Tooley was one of my professors at CU Boulder. Him and Pete Singer are famous. Tooley argues that human beings is not synonymous with persons, like older philosophers would have said. A human being is a member of a certain species, but they're not persons till the age of 2. So you can kill them up to 2 years after they're born. Pete Singer says, no, that's too restrictive. Pete Singer was the bioethics chair at Princeton for many years, was on President Obama's health panel. Pete Singer says, no, you can kill them up to the age of 5. And he has argued repeatedly over the years for, how we need to, he's a fantastic utilitarian. Yeah. Anyways, we should take these resources that we're using for handicapped and disabled people end their lives, and that will be the moral thing to do, because then we can use this money to benefit others who have a better chance or a better quality of life, to bring in the ethics language. So that was what I was trying to bring up in the seminar.
Right. And I used quotes from Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, which all argue for a pro-life position. It's pretty interesting. Now, it wasn't a big group because they kind of hid us away in the basement for our workshop. But it was a pretty positive outcome with those who were there. I mean, in addition to our group, but to others who had come in to kind of see what we were talking about. And we didn't have really any pushback. So that was interesting. Now, the link to that is in the description if you want to watch it. There's a little bit of echoing, so you need to be aware of that because we were like in the basement of the facility. But that went pretty well, about 30 minutes. What other workshops did you guys partake in and why?
Oh my. I partook of a workshop, and back to some of the more the political implications of the Parliament, a workshop on building a bridge to world federalism and global governance, because I wanted to see, okay, what is that bridge? What are they talking about? And I was led by a Baha'i, which didn't surprise me because, of course, within their framework, there is a move towards one world coming together, politically, religiously, even economically, and that press towards that. So I attended that, and it was very, very interesting. It was nothing new that I hadn't heard before, attending UN events, but it reinforced this connecting point between politics and religion.
Yeah, and I think that's been their stated goal all along.
You're right. Yeah.
In the Parliament itself. But again, it's fun to talk to. I talk to a lot of Muslims and a lot of other people, but I have some great conversations with a young Muslim fellow named Dean. He's a college student. And we talked about the Jesus of Islam, Isa, and we talked about what the Bible actually says. And we had this whole discussion. So that was really good. And I spent more time talking to people like Dean than I did going to seminars. The ones I went to were pretty boring, pretty bad. But I don't know about you guys, but I got roped into it over an hour in the walkway with Simon, disciple of Master Lee. You want a new Jesus for your designer Jesus? You look up, there's a picture of a guy, a Korean fellow or a Chinese fellow who's meditating. Underneath him is a big picture of Nostradamus, if you know, moldy old alleged prophet. Right next to a big bunny rabbit.
Yes, I talked to him as well.
Oh, Simon, I must have made eye contact too long, and he literally leaped out to grab me and to get my attention. The bunny represented the fact that this is the Chinese. How do you know that this is the reincarnation? He said Master Lee was the reincarnation of Jesus. How do you know that? Because of Nostradamus and the Chinese year of the rabbit.
Right.
Compelling. I almost fell for it right there. It was just such a powerful argument. I mean, I've gone to a lot of weird things. That's high on my list of really weird things that I've gone to.
But he was very animated, very. He was sold. He was so passionate with his position. Yes, I ended up in a long conversation as well, and I had to eventually remove myself because it was not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, there were. Let's just say much more meaningful. But again, you know, it's our job to plant seeds and let the Holy Spirit grab these people. And I, you know, had great talks with Sikhs and great talks with other people. There was one fun thing. There was, as already mentioned, there was lots of different Muslim groups there, mostly representing Sunni Muslims, the majority. But one of the things that was fascinating to me, and I asked one of the Muslims about this. So you've got a Sunni booth, actually 2 or 3 in a row, right across from an Ahmadiyya Muslim booth, people from Pakistan. And over there, Ahmadiyya is a cult that needs to be stomped on and exterminated. And I asked this Muslim fellow, so I'm curious about this, guys. In Pakistan, Sunni kill those people because they commit, you know, blasphemy in the Islamic sense of claiming that their guy Ahmadiyya is, you know, as a later prophet than Muhammad. He says, oh, no, we've learned to work it out now. And I'm like, oh, yeah, here in the States maybe, but not in Pakistan itself, you know. That's the interesting thing about this. You get these people from all over the world, which is great. To me, one of the funnest things I've ever done is talk to Sikhs who live in Amritsar, which is the Sikh center of the universe in India. And I don't, you know, I'll never get into that place, into the golden, you know, Gurdwara there. But who knows what the Lord can do with these guys that we talk to, wherever they go, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, all these fun places. That's one of the blessings to me of getting a chance to go witness to people at the Parliament. You get to talk to people literally from all over the world that we normally don't get to access.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I had an opportunity to bump into a person at one of the Wiccan ceremonies. I had dragged Mark and Jeff to it. Actually, I didn't drag Jeff. We ended up bumping into each other because he was coming to observe it as well. And I had taken Mark to it because he had never been to something like this before, and he was pretty uncomfortable. And I get it. I understand. I've been in enough situations like that kind of how to maneuver around and not make yourself so obvious. But Mark froze in place, and Jeff was standing right beside him, and he kind of stayed right there, and I just stood beside them. And so when they were doing their invocations to the directions, they end up, of course, turning right to us, and we are right in their face, and they're right in our face. And in the process of all this, when that was done, I ended up bumping into a lady because I was doing some audio and video recording. I bumped into this lady. We both said sorry to each other. End of the story. Well, Jeff, Mark, and I end up sitting in the registration area on those not so comfortable seats. And this lady walks by, the same one that I bumped into at the Wiccan event, and she gives me a wave. I give her a thumbs up, and then we end up meeting together at the restaurant. And I don't know how long I sat with her, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe an hour. I can't remember what it was, but I know Bill, you, and I think Rita and Christina were sitting off on one side, and maybe Mark could join you. I can't even remember, but I am talking to this lady for a long time. Fabulous conversation. And she was asking what I thought of it all, and I gave her some explanations because this is not necessarily new to me. But she also brought up, she said, okay, I'm an interfaith minister. I've never been to the Parliament before. Why are there so many United Nations people here?
Mm-hmm.
That's what she said to me. And so that ended up opening up this massive conversation. And, that we were engaged as Christian. I'm engaged as a Christian researcher, but here to have these kinds of conversations. And we ended up having this enormous conversation.
What did you tell her?
Oh, we went all the way from Genesis chapter 3 all the way to
Well,
Revelation.
I'm thinking in specific answer to that question.
Well, and I was fortunate because I jumped into this field of interest back in, well, golly, my first real interactions was back in 1997, incidentally with Robert Mueller at the Global Citizenship Youth Congress. And then in terms of interfaithism, back in 1999, my first interfaith event was with United Religions Initiative, holding a special meeting with the World Federalist Association in Washington, D.C. So I could bring to her some of those examples of both politics and religions coming together. And so she ended up being the one saying, this looks like a world religion for a world government. She's the one that brought that out.
Really?
And so,
Bingo.
yeah, exactly. And so it opened up this fantastic conversation, and we ended up meeting the next day. I gave her a copy of my book, and then we bumped into each other a third time. And her father had drove into Chicago. I guess he's from the area, and I'm meeting him. And so you never know what kind of conversations will unfold.
The first day for us, we got there on Sunday afternoon. The Parliament didn't start till Monday. We went into the dining room at the hotel there, and there were two ladies sitting down a few chairs away from us at a large table. And they just started talking to them all of a sudden. One of them was a Roman Catholic nun, had been a nun for over 60 years. And so we're asking her about her stuff. She goes, I have to be honest, I don't really include Jesus in my spiritual mix. This is a Roman Catholic nun that was basically saying she's not all that interested in what Jesus said. And so we talked to her. Name was Carol or something. We talked to her several times over the course of the week. So the next day, as you guys who were there know, we had to go register. And the line, by the time I got there, the line was about 2.5 hours long just to register. They really screwed up on registration. But here's the great thing about the Lord. So we had a conversation with this nun and challenged her on some things. So I'm sitting in line, and there was this wonderful middle-aged lady from Miami. She's in a New Thought church. And for those that aren't in the audience that aren't aware, it's just an old-fashioned name for the New Age movement or the New Spirituality, whatever you call it. About 150 years ago, that was the big rage, was New Thought. And she's in the current New Thought church. Her name was Carly, We talked for 2.5 hours. She did not want to waste her time in that line. She wanted to talk. And so I was able to give her my testimony, present the gospel, challenge the new thought ideas, all over the course. And she was just really friendly. And so several times over the course of the next several days, she would see me. I'm kind of easy to spot. And she would come up and grab me and give me a hug. Bill, I'm so glad I met you and talking to you. And, blah, blah. I'm like, Lord, that was a fun conversation. Those kind of things are wonderful. I hated standing in that line. But I got a great chance to talk to this lady for 2.5 hours.
There's a lot of relationship building. And now back to something that Carl was mentioning. The Parliament has never been shy about their connection to the UN. It started out that way under Mueller. They've continued that. They've also created their chaplaincy, trying to become an arm of the religious chaplains representing the UN. So they've always been very closely connected since 1993. But the thing you just raised, Bill, is an important one. A lot of people have asked me, why do you go there? Well, there's multiple reasons. The primary reason is we want to proclaim the gospel. But it needs to be done in a particular kind of a way. Standing outside with bullhorns telling them to repent is not all that really effective. However, you're in an environment where everybody there is interested in talking about religion, particularly their religion.
Right.
And so if you can ask the right kind of questions to open the conversation, they are more than willing to talk and to listen to what you have to say. I believe it was Carl ran into a woman that at one time, I think, had been a Unitarian. I don't know that she still is. And brought her to kind of hang out with our group. And it might have been Bill. I don't remember if it was Bill or Carl. But she's concerned about what's going on with the school system. She's concerned about what's going on with the government. She's concerned about all of these things. She came to the Parliament to try to figure out what they're up to. And she was aghast at what she was seeing.
Why?
Pardon?
Why was she aghast?
Because
she was a Christian, right?
Well, we don't know if she was a Christian, but because Unitarians are not Christians.
Oh, okay.
I think she has graduated from Unitarianism to being a Christian at this point. And she's very concerned about what's going on with CRT. She's concerned what's going on in the school. And as she's walking around this venue, what she's finding is officially they are all supportive of all of this stuff.
Yeah. When you talked about this lady who came for the first time, and she's an interfaith minister. Okay, this is already like she should just fit right in here. It's like this is like practically her gospel. And the first thing she notices, which seems to surprise her, is all these UN people. So as soon as I heard that, and we've talked already about how you've got this overarching theme of we're trying to have a one world religion. We're actually doing this Parliament thing to achieve some kind of interfaith religious unity. And yet we know there are some of the biggest groups there. Hindus and Muslims are two of the biggest groups there. They're never going to be on board with that.
Right.
So you have, so I look at that piece of the puzzle, that component of what's going on. I look at the presence of all these UN people in whose interest it is to have the one world religion. It's in their interest. It's against the interest of Hindus, Muslims, and I would argue Jews and Christians too, for the most part. I mean, the Orthodox ones. So for some reason, my mind went directly to Baron Karl von Clausewitz's statement. It's kind of a paraphrase of what he said. War is politics by other means.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
So I think to add to that, it seems to me like what you're just describing the problem as is going to set the stage for a person to come along one day, who will really be able to do a lot of really impressive things.
Something like one of these Left Behind movies kind of guy?
Yeah. Only with a lot better stage presence. Okay, so there's going to be somebody that's going to pull off stuff that nobody's ever able to imagine, like bringing Hindus and Muslims together. I mean, the Sikhs tried.
That'd be interesting. I wouldn't be, but here's where I'm going with this. war is religion by other. I mean, war is. I'm sorry, politics by other means. In other words, I'm trying to get my objectives politically, and I'm just going to use different means, which include, guns and tanks and bombers and things like that. So I'm really playing the same game. I'm just playing it in a different way. It's called
Mhm.
war now.
Mhm.
When it used to be called politics.
Right.
And so so that's Clausewitz's thesis, which is again a paraphrase: war is politics by other means. I would say politics is religion
Mhm.
by other means.
Mhm.
In other words, when I can't get achieve the consensus I'm trying to achieve, because I mean, think of the Tower of Babel. It was a political decision to say, no, we're going to stay here in this one spot, and we're going to build a city. We're going to build a tower reaching to heaven. I mean, the religion was telling them, well, God said scatter, but then they made a political decision. They decided they wanted to change the religion and conduct religion by other means, conduct it through a politics of unity. It sounds so good, doesn't it? A politics
Right.
of unity. So now basically what she's observing, and it's interesting to me that she found it. It seems like she found it surprising or maybe even jarring to see so many UN people there. Is that accurate? Do you think, Carl?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it is politics. I mean, my
She
goodness,
she she didn't realize, she
she
didn't get
doesn't
it
either.
yet.
No,
She's not
of course
getting
not.
that nobody's going to ever, I mean, her interfaith thing, gig is never going to be the majority, vote. And
Right.
so, but if people really want it, you're going to have to use politics.
And you do see political posturing. I mean, my goodness, the Sikhs in
Right.
the Langar tent had a great big display of the
Now,
United Nations
what's the
Sustainable
Langer
Development
tent? So
Goals.
that everyone knows, Carl, what's the Langer tent?
It's the opposite of Fish Friday and let's have burgers for the rest of the week. It's a it's a vegetarian meal that is
Okay.
cooked for the community, and so
And
it was.
By
would
the
they
Sikhs.
like
The Sikhs
the
put it
That's
Sikhs?
by
on.
the Sikhs. Yes, by the
The
Sikhs.
Sikhs are not like the, what was that Seals and Crofts group that, they're not like these interfaith type people. In other words, they would all love it if they were the one world religion, right? Just like Muslims would like it if Islam was the one world
Yeah,
religion.
I
Like
think to be
Baha'i.
fair, the Sikhs in some
Baha'i.
Yeah.
the Baha'i are very open this way. I think the Sikhs in
Right.
some respects were originally an attempt to create a one unifying religion in India, and this all it did was give the Hindus and Muslims new targets to kill. But that was Nanak, Guru Nanak, their teacher. That was his goal, was to try to unite these groups who've been killing each other for 700 years at this point. Didn't work. And so now they're a hated minority in India and attacked everywhere. I've had maybe some of the best conversations in my life with Sikhs, but I want to go on to the interfaith guy. I met a guy, we're all sitting at dinner outside on the patio, and we're crowded over into the table next to us. And I sit next to this elderly gentleman who is an interfaith chaplain at San Quentin Prison. And I used to be a cop and worked in a lot of jails and stuff. And so we started this interesting conversation. And then we got into what he's saying and what's missing from what he's saying, and why here's what the gospel says. Here's how the gospel challenges this whole thing. And we had a great conversation. And the guy's a mess. He's an absolute mess. He's been divorced 4 times, and he has a child with cancer, as do I right now. So we had kind of hit off on several different issues. But it was just a dinner conversation that graduated into an amazing conversation with an interfaith chaplain who has nothing in particular to say. It's the old joke, what do you get when you cross a Unitarian with a Jehovah's Witness? Somebody goes door to door with nothing in particular to say.
Yeah.
That's what this guy's offering up at San Quentin. He's got a heart for these prisoners, great, but what do you say to them?
Right.
It all just messes together, and there's nothing definitive at all to offer hope.
Right.
Right.
So Eric Clement poses a question. What was the Muslim presence like at the parliament?
Well, if Eric had been there, he would have known.
Exactly. Eric.
Sorry, Eric, it's a secret. You don't have the code word. I saw a lot of Muslim booths. I had some great conversations, lots of different Muslims there.
Yeah.
And
a lot of Muslim workshops.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with the imam that was there from India representing, and they had a big sign up. 249 churches were burned. Huge signs. So I went over to talk to them. Well, the pictures they've got are a mosque being attacked. and they were complaining about the current PM of India, who seems to be pretty hardcore Hindu, and they're basically driving out Muslims, Christians, and everybody else. But the sign they put up was attracting Christians, right? 249 churches. But it was a Muslim group, representing Islam in India and stuff like this. Eric, there was a lot of Muslims there.
Yeah, and the 2015 Parliament was funded by Teichrib, which is a Muslim Saudi-based organization working in partnership with the Vatican.
Speaking of one world religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Muslim presence is remarkable.
Well, I think the biggest problem with the parliament, though, is all the complaints from the local pizzerias of the pantheists calling and saying, "Could you make me one with everything?"
Well, yeah, but
Because you called that a bad joke. That's so bad. I think the 1993 Parliament.
it's a problem when you go in to pick it up and you pay and you're waiting for some money back and they go, no, change comes from within.
That's horrible. That's horrible.
I got my first copy of the Quran and a copy of a picture of the Kaaba from a big Saudi-based organization at the Parliament. It was a huge thing at the Parliament in 93. And Eric and I were sitting there together. It's a fun story. So right down the hall from them is the ISIS worshippers. So the next day I take a cab over I had to go somewhere. And I asked the driver, who was Muslim, I said, I'm at the Parliament of World Religions. And I got my Quran from the Saudis, and right down the hall is the ISIS worshippers. And I go, so what do you think of that? And the guy says, right out of his mouth, I think they should be killed. So it turns out he's an Ahmadiyya Muslim. It's the first one I ever talked to, Ahmadiyya. So we went over to his local mosque there in Chicago, and he gave me all his Ahmadiyya literature, which I never really run into them before. So I go back the next day, I go back to the Saudi-run thing. I said, I had the most fascinating conversation with a Muslim cab driver yesterday. You want to know what he told me? And I'm like, what? And he said, you should be killed. And the guy's, those fundamentalists, I'm like, actually, he's just a student of the Quran, obviously.
Eric is kind of picking up on what you just said, because he says this, let me go back here. Since Islam is firstly monotheistic and believes Islam and Sharia should be global, it should oppose any push for global religion without Muhammad. And then he follows up with, so the politics, someone else, the politics has fooled the interfaith movement to serve the political agenda. While there really is nothing that will benefit, no one really wants one religion. Good trick.
Actually, no. Politics has followed the interfaith agenda. If you take a look at how the Parliament of the World Religions was formed in 1893 and what it was meant to be at 1893, it was the spark that birthed the idea of internationalism for the last 100 years.
Right.
It's interesting. Politics in this sense has actually followed the religion.
Here's a problem that you're pointing out that we've all talked about is because our culture is so historically illiterate, they don't see the connection between what happened in 1893, for example, and what's going on now. This predates all of that. I think what we're kind of looking at is what I have called the Tower of Babel 2.0. Right? They're just reverting back to what we saw happening at the Tower of Babel.
Let me illustrate from 1893, the most famous guru in the world at the time, Vivekananda, comes from India and is the rock star at the 1893. All the hardcore New Thought churches and all the liberal churches on the East Coast wanted to have Vivekananda there. And so when we went to 93, I sitting in the session with one of the professors from Harvard, talking about how wonderful it was. Since this goes right into what you're saying, since 1893 to 1993, in that 100 years, we now have, she mentions 1,800 mosques and 1,500 Buddhist stupas and all this different thing all over the United States. Isn't it so wonderful that the Parliament's goal in just 100 years has so dramatically changed the American culture? And she was a big fan of this, like Diana something, I can't remember her last name, but I think that's part of the package. And Eric's point about Muhammad, again, if you can take maybe a Baha'i version or something like this, but there's going to be a Jesus present in this one world religion.
Right.
We've already mentioned that, the subtleties of all these different groups changing it. There's going to be something that will unite the world's religions other than the dude himself. Will be something like a very different sort of Jesus that we're already describing. It's at play here And that will be a source for everybody, including good Muslims who say they revere, Isa as their second prophet, that they can sign into. And I don't think that Parliament's going to push for much more than that kind of, going into John Hicks or people like that, the real, which is open to all sorts of subtleties, like, oh, you want to have Muhammad, oh, you guys want to have, Krishna or whatever, but still have this central core that'll form the heart of the one world religion.
So they're the fact that we're so much closer. Well, let's say we were so much closer in 1993, and definitely now, to the goals of the Parliament than we were when it started. Are they crediting the Parliament with that? Are they saying that this is
Not yet. They're still trying to. I think they're still trying to decide internally how this is going to work together: one world government, one world religion. In addition to which, Carl spends a lot of time watching Dialing for Dollars in Davos, because they're also pushing for a one world economy. So we have three things going on simultaneously, and they're all interconnected. And what I find is you have some who are watching one, unaware of the other two, but they all three are synergistic. They're working together.
Yep.
So,
and then I just came back from Burning Man, and that is the global cultural side,
right.
where you actually have the political, including the World Economic Forum and UN officials, and religious leaders and religious symbolism scattered everywhere, including this year a 60-foot high ziggurat chapel of Babel. So, yeah,
You
There
know
you
what they
go.
call it? The Chapel of Babel?
yeah, actually, it was a chapel of
Losing
Babel.
all subtlety here, aren't we?
Oh, there was no subtlety. No,
Yeah.
it was very
I'm
blatant.
going to the chapel and
One of
gonna
the
be
things
Babel.
one of the things I think that's important as we consider the change within the interfaith movement, and again, you were at the 1993 one. I didn't jump on board until on the interfaith side until I started to attend United Religious Initiative meetings back in 1999 and 2000, and that is the change in the language. Back in the day, it was we were fundamentalists. If you were evangelical Christian, you were fundamentalist. Then it became you're an exclusivist. Then became your at the 2018 Parliament, you are a supremacist.
They're kind of othering us, aren't they?
Exactly. And then this
We're being
Parliament,
othered.
the language was inescapable. You heard it every single day. It's all throughout the
But
workbook.
I thought we shouldn't other people.
Right. And now the language has shifted. We are authoritarians.
White
That came
supremacy.
through
White
constantly.
supremacists, Christian
Yep.
nationalists, all the rest.
Yep.
They tend to like to call us the things that they're doing themselves, don't they? That kind
Well,
And Don, were you not at a meeting where or a different phrase was thrown out? The T word,
of the
terrorist.
Oh,
terrorists, right. Right.
I thought that was reserved for PTA parents who care about what their children.
Well, it's
They're
interesting
taught.
because in that one, Carl knows me. I like to wait for one question to arise to my brain, and then they unwittingly do call on me. And this was a weird one because I went in. They're talking about the white, nationalists, white terrorists, all that, and I had my cowboy hat on and my embroidered shirt, so obviously I stuck out like a neon sign, and they still called on me. And I posed a question. I said, "Now, I love the concept that you have of trying to bring everyone together under one roof to at least dialogue about the issues. I agree with that. We don't have to agree on them, I think, but dialogue. It's obvious to me you have nobody representing a conservative view in the entire panel here. Is there a reason for that?" And they were all dumbfounded. They did not know how to respond to that.
Never occurred to them
They
to.
want to be inclusive to everyone that agrees with them, but they exclude anyone who does not agree with them.
Funny how that works.
We
Yeah.
got to exclude
One
the
path that doesn't lead
exclusionary.
to the top of the mountain, one spoke that doesn't lead to the hub of the wheel. This is very consistent with them.
Jay Wiz asked this question. If interfaith leads the politics, then what is the motivation of the elite powers in interfaith, and who are they? Anybody?
I think Robert Mueller was a prime example of that.
He was, absolutely.
He bridged the political and the religious, absolutely,
What
100%.
kind of power do these people actually have, though? I
Well,
mean, you
Robert
talk
Mueller
about
put together 11 of the UN specialized agencies, so it wasn't like he was just
what do
some.
these agencies do?
Well, some of them would be like UNICEF and
UNESCO, a whole bunch of things.
So they
yep,
funnel money basically to
yes, political
goals.
power and position.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
and people
prestige.
when you funnel money to something, a project like whatever UNICEF is doing, people get it. People get paid things. So so there are economic interests connected to UNICEF.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and power. Now,
Hmm.
Nancy Pelosi was part of this one, as are others. So they always have some politicians advocating for what they're doing. Uh, yeah, so it does lead politics, and they are, again, they're synergistic. They kind of work together. They're trying to bring about the same end result, which excludes Christianity. Now, there's only about a dozen of us that have generally been the ones that are there might be other conservative Christians there, but it's hard to run into them if they are. Uh, I would suggest, if anyone's interested, they do this every 3 to 5 years, that we can direct you on how to get some training to know how to talk, because it really comes down to how do you engage in a
Yeah.
conversation to get to the point of sharing the gospel. Everyone I have spoken with there at some point was at least opening to listening to what the gospel is. Whether they believe it or not is not my task. My task is to properly,
Is
clearly
that
present what it is for them to make their own decision.
is that due just to the fact that there's a certain kind of etiquette at this parliament where
Yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
And that etiquette should extend really to all walks of life. I know that there are some who really think that the best way to go is to go in and grab you by the throat and just shout Jesus at you. And maybe that works. I have found generally it's best to go in and ask them questions. What is it that you believe? And then they always will tell you what you need to know to ask them the next
I
question. Our guy Jeff Wisner, you've
yeah.
mentioned him. I love that he is pretty new Christian. He's 7 years or so. He's learning a lot, and he asked me, "How do you do this?" I said, "Well, we've taught him a lot of things about how to share the faith." I said, "You have to develop something that works well for you from a personal standpoint." So he developed a question. He would meet with someone and say, "Tell me the three most important things about your religion." Now that engaged them, and then it gave him the opportunity to ask questions about what they were saying to get to the point of giving the gospel. So yeah, I think there's a proper etiquette. There's mutual respect. You
Hmm.
don't have to agree. You don't have to say your religion is true. You can disagree and say, I believe your religion is false. You can say that. And many times, depending on how you say it, they won't agree with you, but they'll at least acknowledge you have the right to view it that way.
So you want to avoid guys who are like 6'5" and muscle bound and look
No,
intimidating. Grab
don't
people
talk
by
to
the
them.
grab people by the collar and say, "Are you ready to meet God?"
Yeah, no, I don't want to talk
That's
with a
not
guy
the
like that.
approach to you want to use.
Yeah. And you take them seriously. You take them seriously, even if it is a young man who jumps out right in the middle of the aisle and tries to draw a connection between Nostradamus, Easter eggs, and
Exactly.
you still take them seriously
Yeah,
because
we have
for them that is serious.
a couple things we say at Haven. One is, no one gets hated into the kingdom of God.
No.
Right.
No one gets screamed at into the kingdom of God. It doesn't happen that way. And we take the phrase that Paul uses in Ephesians 4:15, which is written for the church contextually, but to speak the truth and love one to another. We think that's a pretty good standard to talk to everybody that way, whether they be Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, New Age, or what. So we're going to confront the ideas, but we are going to engage them hopefully in such a way, other than my one time with Adida, we're going to engage them in such a way that they don't think we hate them, that we actually care about them. We're interested in what's going on with them. Some of these people we've engaged with, same people for years, and I thrill with those kinds of situations. They know I don't hate them, and I'm going to challenge them every time we get together, and that's all good.
It's really interesting as I go through the scriptures, the prophets in the Old Testament were the hardest on those in the family of faith who were following false teachers. Uh, when we go to New Testament, Jesus mostly asked questions. when someone asked him a question, he would ask a question back to kind of clarify, here's what we're talking about. Paul does the same thing. So it seems to me understanding what they believe and asking the right questions is the way to get to the gospel. And it makes our lives easier because I sort of practice what I call evangelism by judo. I take their argument like grabbing their arm. I help them continue on their path till they fall on the floor. It doesn't take a lot to do that, but you have to pay attention. Gentlemen, we have run over a little bit. What
I blame Ron.
Carl and then Bill, what would you say the challenge in light of what we're just talking about, what's going on with the UN, what's going on with the Parliament, what's going on with Davos? How do you challenge the church to think about how they are operating today in these cultures? Just a few thoughts, not a whole.
We're in this world, but not of this world. So we have to be concerned with what's going on with our neighbors, with our communities, with our country, and with the world itself. That does not mean we have to engage with the same ideas and hold on to those ideas to be acceptable. We need to see what is good, what is godly. The early church did this all over the place. They challenged the authorities. Even at the cost of their lives, they were willing to challenge the terrible things that the Roman Empire was doing. And I would love to see our church be bold enough to speak the truth and to be recognized that this is a weird group, but they love people.
Mm-hmm. I would suggest that when you take a look at the larger complex of what this entails, that political, economic, religious component, that in essence, it is the shaping up of an alternative salvation claim.
Right.
That in its entirety, it is a salvation claim. And by that nature, it affords us the opportunity to now engage with an alternative to their alternative, which is Jesus Christ. That we're not building heaven on earth. You're not going to be doing it through the UN or through the Parliament or through any of your other institutions. You're not going to be doing it from your internal experience of LSD or meditation or whatever it may be. But it now offers us the opportunity to have a conversation about where our true salvation can be found.
Right. Right, and that's really important. So we all of us appreciate your prayers when we encounter these. We do a lot of these kinds of things throughout the course of the year. Paganicon Festival is always interesting. Burning Man is an important one, although I can't imagine camping with 80,000 of my closest friends.
And you have to learn how to swim.
In the middle of a storm, in which climate change protesters are blocking access.
Yes.
This is an unusual year.
But gentlemen, thank you for being with us again. I appreciate it as always, and it's a panic for us to do that. So
yeah.
adios.
Let's give credit